The day had been exhausting. Between back-to-back meetings and a grueling session at the gym, all he wanted was a hot shower and the comfort of his couch. As he unlocked the door and stepped into his quiet home, he felt an odd sense of calm wash over him, until he saw it. Draped over the arm of the couch was a jacket he didn't recognize. He frowned, wondering if he just overlooked it somehow. But no, he knew every item that came and went from their house. This jacket, however, was different, dark green leather, buttery and smooth, with delicate stitching on the lapels. He picked it up, inhaling a faint scent of expensive perfume he didn't recognize. It felt too high-end to belong to Emma, or to anyone he knew, really. "Emma?" he called out, half hoping she'd appear and offer an innocent explanation. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself, and her cheerful voice echoed back. "Yes? You're home late." As she approached, wiping her hands on a dish towel, he held up the jacket. "Did you buy this?" Emma's smile faltered slightly as she glanced at it, something flickering in her eyes before she composed herself. "Oh. No, it's a friend's. She must have left it here when she came by the other day." "What friend?" He tried to keep his tone casual, but a faint tension lingered in his voice. "Lola. You remember? I mentioned her before." She flashed him a quick smile, but her eyes didn't quite meet his. "She was in the area and just stopped by for coffee. I must have forgotten to mention it." "Oh." He nodded slowly, absorbing this explanation. "Lola, you haven't mentioned her before, actually." Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "Really? I thought I had." "She's a newer friend. Met her through work." He wanted to believe her, but something didn't sit right. He forced a casual shrug. "Just seemed odd, that's all. I haven't seen you wear anything like this before." Emma chuckled lightly. "Not my style, right? It's a bit flashy for me." She walked back to the kitchen, and he felt the awkwardness settle between them. He studied the jacket again, inspecting the fine stitching, feeling the weight of something unsaid hanging in the air. Later that evening, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the scent of the perfume lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. He knew every detail of Emma's work life and friends, or so he thought. Her excuse had been quick, too quick. For the first time in years he felt a shift, a subtle distance. The next morning, he casually brought it up again over breakfast. "So, what does Lola do?" he asked, reaching for his coffee mug. Emma's fork paused over her plate for a fraction of a second before she replied. "She's kind of in event planning. Well, more high-end entertainment, actually." "High-end entertainment?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "Like corporate events?" She hesitated again, just a flicker, and then nodded. "Yeah, something like that." As they finished breakfast, he let the conversation fade, feeling the weight of his suspicions settle into his chest. Emma was hiding something, and the thought gnawed at him, leaving him with a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. After Emma left for work, he went back to the jacket, examining every pocket. In one of them, he found a slip of paper with Lola Sinclair, scrawled in elegant handwriting, accompanied by a phone number. The curiosity gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. The jacket and the name, Lola Sinclair, refused to leave his mind, lingering like a whisper he couldn't quite hear clearly. Emma had always been honest, or so he thought. This strange new name, combined with the way she'd reacted when he mentioned it, kept him on edge. A few days later, he found himself alone in the house again. Emma was out for the evening, citing a work dinner that had come up last minute. Normally, he'd take her at her word. But now, with Lola Sinclair in the back of his mind, he felt a pang of doubt he couldn't ignore. It didn't take long before he found himself checking around the house. He told himself he was just clearing up his doubts, that once he satisfied his curiosity, he'd be able to let it go. He went through drawers, pockets of her coats, even her jewelry box. But everything was in its usual order, until he got to her handbag. Inside one of the smaller pockets he found it, a sleek black business card with elegant gold embossing. The name, Lola Sinclair, was printed across it, followed by the title, Private Entertainer. A contact number glimmered just below, alongside a link to a website that looked too professional to be a hobby. He stared at the card, his hand tightening around it as a million questions ran through his mind. Just then, he heard the front door open, and Emma stepped inside. He slipped the card back into the pocket and straightened, his mind racing. He tried to keep his face neutral as she entered the room, offering her a strained smile. "Hey," she said, hanging her coat up by the door. "You're still up?" He nodded. "Couldn't sleep." His voice sounded casual, but his heart was hammering in his chest. "How was the work dinner?" Emma hesitated just a beat before responding. "Good. Long. I'm wiped." He watched her carefully. "You know, I keep thinking about that friend of yours, Lola. The one who left the jacket here." Emma's expression tightened slightly, but she forced a smile. "Oh? Why's that?" "I was just curious about her work." "You said she was in high-end entertainment?" She laughed lightly, but it sounded a bit forced. "Yeah, she deals with some exclusive clientele. It's hard to explain." He tilted his head, studying her. "Really? It sounds interesting. How did you two meet again?" Emma fidgeted, rubbing her hands together. "Oh, through mutual friends. We met at an event." "An event?" he repeated, his eyes never leaving her face. "Yes, at a fundraiser," she said quickly. "Listen, it's late. Let's talk about this some other time, okay?" He nodded slowly, watching her retreat to their bedroom. Her quick responses, the slight stumbles in her answers, they all painted a picture he didn't want to see. But it was there, nonetheless. She was hiding something, and now he knew who she was hiding it with. The next morning, after Emma left for work, he waited a few hours before pulling out his phone. He typed the website from Lola's card into the browser, heart pounding as the page loaded. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Lola Sinclair was indeed an escort, advertised as a private entertainer for exclusive clients. She was discreet, professional, and came with a steep price tag. His chest tightened as he took it all in. This wasn't just a casual friend Emma had picked up through work. Lola was someone Emma had deliberately concealed from him, a hidden part of her life that had somehow slipped into their home. Later that day, Emma called him to say she'd be working late again. He tried to keep his tone even, his questions light, though he could feel the bitterness creeping into his voice. "You sure work a lot of late nights lately," he commented. She paused. "I know. Things have been really busy. I'm just as frustrated as you are." "Frustrated?" He let out a hollow laugh. "It seems like you've got plenty of ways to unwind these days." There was a brief silence, and he could almost feel her tension through the phone. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing," he said, biting his lip to hold back. "Just making conversation." That night, as he lay alone in bed, he felt the weight of the situation fully settle on him. His trust in Emma was fractured, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it broke entirely. But he needed proof, a way to confirm everything before confronting her. After weeks of careful planning and quiet surveillance, he had all the proof he needed. Each piece of evidence he'd collected told a story that he could no longer ignore. Emma's affair was real, and it was time to confront her. But he wanted more than just a private showdown. He wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal. So, he arranged a small gathering at their home under the guise of a casual get-together, inviting close friends and family members. Everyone knew Emma well, trusted her, saw her as part of their lives, just as he had. The day of the confrontation arrived, and he went through the motions, greeting guests, setting out drinks, making small talk. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his demeanor calm, even smiling occasionally as he moved around the room. He spotted Emma laughing with one of her friends, the same warm smile that had once made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Now, it felt like a mask hiding a stranger. As the evening wore on, he decided it was time. He gathered everyone in the living room under the pretense of sharing a few words. The casual chatter died down as he cleared his throat and looked around the room, his gaze finally settling on Emma. She looked at him with a curious smile, unaware of what was about to unfold. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice calm but carrying an edge that hinted at his tension. "I have something important to share with everyone. I've been struggling with it for a while, and I think now is the right time to bring it out into the open." Emma's smile faded, replaced by a slight frown. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to sound light-hearted but clearly unnerved. He pulled a small stack of papers from his pocket, the screenshots, the phone records, every carefully documented piece of evidence he'd gathered. He held them up for a moment, letting the weight of the papers sink in, before looking at her. "It's about you, Emma. And Lola Sinclair." A murmur went through the room, and Emma's face went pale. Her friends and family exchanged glances, clearly confused. She shifted uncomfortably, a forced smile on her lips. "What are you talking about?" He didn't flinch. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've been lying to me. To all of us." Emma's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face as she took a step toward him. "This is crazy. You're misunderstanding something." "Oh, really?" he said, his voice tinged with bitterness as he unfolded one of the papers and held it up. "You want to tell me why you've been spending all those work dinners with a high-end escort? Here are the locations. Here are the dates. Everything matches perfectly with when you said you'd be working late," she stammered, reaching out as if to grab the papers. "Stop. Not here. Please, this is private." "Private?" He laughed hollowly, the sound ringing in the silence of the room. "Was it private when you brought her jacket into our home? When you introduced her perfume into our lives? Because I could smell it every time you came back, Emma." She took a step back, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Please, can we go somewhere and talk about this alone?" "No, Emma. I think everyone here deserves to know the truth." He turned to their friends and family, his voice cracking slightly as he continued. "I trusted her. We all did. And this is how she's repaid that trust, by sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, and bringing this mess into our lives." One of Emma's friends, a close confidant, looked at her in shock. "Emma, is this true?" Emma's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for a friendly face, someone who might defend her. But she was met with stunned silence, the weight of her betrayal settling heavily over the room. She turned back to him, her face twisted with anger and desperation. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what it's been like." "Then explain it to me, Emma," he said, his voice cold. "Explain why you thought it was okay to destroy everything we built. Why you felt the need to humiliate me in front of the people I care about." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "You've been so distant lately. So focused on work, on everything but us. I didn't know how to handle it." He shook his head, disappointment written across his face. "So, instead of talking to me, instead of working on it together, you chose to betray me with someone you barely know." She looked down, tears brimming in her eyes, but he felt no sympathy. Instead, he turned to his friends and family, struggling to keep his composure. "I'm sorry to bring all of you into this. I know it's not fair. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep lying to myself." The room was thick with tension, and no one spoke. Emma stood alone, her shame exposed, while he felt a bitter satisfaction. He had wanted the truth to come out, and now it had. But as he looked around the room at the faces of the people he cared about, he realized just how deep the fracture ran. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of a chapter in all of their lives. Finally, he set the stack of papers on the coffee table and took a step back. "This is it, Emma. I can't live like this anymore. Consider this the end." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing amidst a shocked silence, surrounded by the consequences of her actions. The days following the confrontation felt surreal, as if he were living in a fog. After the shocking revelations, he and Emma had decided to stay under the same roof for the time being, but every moment was suffocating. The house that had once felt warm and inviting now seemed like a prison, filled with echoes of laughter that had turned to silence. He spent hours in his office, trying to work, but the words on the screen blurred together. The faces of his friends and family haunted him, expressions of shock, pity, disbelief. He hadn't wanted to be the center of their attention, yet here he was, a spectacle of heartbreak and betrayal. One evening, after a long day of silence, he decided he needed to talk to someone, anyone, who could understand what he was going through. He picked up his phone and dialed his brother, Mark, who answered almost immediately. "Hey man, how's it going?" Mark's voice was casual, but there was a hint of concern in it. "Not great," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I could really use someone to talk to. Sure. Want me to come over? Yes, please. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. I'll be here. When Mark arrived, he found him sitting on the couch, staring into space. Mark walked in, concern etched on his face. You look like hell, thanks, he muttered, managing a small smile. Just trying to figure everything out. Mark sat down beside him, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. So, what's the plan? Have you and Emma talked more since, you know? He sighed heavily, looking down at his hands. Not really. It feels like we're just avoiding each other. She spends most of her time in the bedroom, and I'm stuck here trying to piece my life back together. You need to talk to her, Mark said. You can't just sit in silence. It's not good for either of you. I know that, he snapped, frustration boiling over. But what's there to say? I'm angry, hurt, and I don't know if I can forgive her. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to stay together, Mark said softly. But you can't move forward until you've had that conversation. You deserve closure. He ran a hand through his hair again, feeling the weight of Mark's words. I just don't understand how she could do this to me. To us, people make mistakes, Mark replied gently. Some people can't handle their feelings and look for escape. It doesn't make it right, but it happens. Just try to keep that in mind when you talk to her. The next day, he decided he couldn't hide from the situation any longer. He knocked on Emma's bedroom door, and after a moment of silence, he heard her muffled voice. What? Can we talk? He asked, keeping his tone steady. Do we have to? She replied, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, we do. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked vulnerable, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of the love he once had for her. Look, I'm not here to fight, he said, his voice softer now. I just want to understand what happened. Emma nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. I messed up. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt so alone, and I didn't know how to reach out to you. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. Did you ever think about how it would affect me? Us? He felt a lump in his throat as he fought to keep his emotions in check. You brought someone else into our marriage, Emma. How could you think I wouldn't be hurt by that? I know, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I thought I could keep it separate. I didn't want to lose you. But I ended up losing everything. He crossed his arms, a mix of anger and sorrow swirling inside him. You should have told me you were unhappy. I would have listened. We could have worked through it together. I didn't want to burden you, she said, shaking her head. You were so focused on work. I thought it was easier to pretend. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their shared history pressing down on him. So now what? Are we just supposed to pretend this never happened? I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I made a horrible mistake, but I want to make things right. He felt a pang in his chest at her words, but they didn't erase the pain she had caused. I need time to think, he said, forcing himself to remain calm. We need to figure out what this means for us, for our future. Emma nodded, her expression pained but resigned. I understand. I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Forgiveness takes time, he replied, turning away to mask his own tears. And right now, I don't know if I can. I just need some space. He left the room, closing the door behind him, feeling the weight of her gaze on his back. It was a small step forward, but it felt monumental. As he wandered through the empty house, the silence was deafening. Their marriage was in shambles, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it might be beyond repair. Days turned into weeks, and the divorce proceedings began. Emma moved into a spare room while he sorted through the aftermath. Friends and family reached out, some offering support, others expressing their disappointment in her. He became the reluctant center of their conversations, receiving sympathy he didn't want but needed nonetheless. One evening, after a long day of discussions with lawyers, he decided to call Mark again. Hey man! How are you holding up? Mark asked, his tone easy and familiar. I'm managing. It's just exhausting, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I keep going over everything in my head. I thought I knew her, you know. I get that, Mark replied. You'll have good days and bad days. Just take it one step at a time, thanks. I appreciate you checking in. I'm always here for you. Just let me know if you need anything. Or if you want to get out of the house for a bit. He paused, considering. Yeah, maybe that's what I need. A distraction? Let's grab a drink this weekend, Mark suggested. Just you and me. No talk of the divorce, just a night out. Sounds good, he replied, grateful for the offer. As he hung up, he felt a flicker of hope. He realized that while the aftermath of Emma's betrayal was painful, he still had people who cared for him. He could begin to rebuild his life, one day at a time. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with loneliness and heartache, but he was determined to face it head-on, no longer shackled by the weight of betrayal. The days stretched on, but he was ready to reclaim his narrative, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to forgive both Emma and himself.